Hey guys, Buildzoid here from Actually Hardcore Overclocking, and today we're going to be doing a motherboard considerations for Ryzen 3rd Gen CPUs. We're going to be going through X570 boards, X470 boards, and B450 motherboards, because the first thing you need to answer when choosing a motherboard for your 3rd Gen CPU is, do I need PCIe 4.0? Because you probably don't, and if you don't, you can save a lot of money that you can then use to actually get more performance instead of wasting it on PCIe 4.0.
Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly's Conductonaut liquid metal. Conductonaut is what we've used in all of our liquid metal and D-lit thermal tests, capable of dropping CPU thermals significantly when replacing the stock thermal interface. Lower CPU thermals don't just allow better overclocks, but also lower noise levels because the transfer efficiency is increased. The mix of gallium and indium makes for a thermal conductivity of 73 watts per meter Kelvin, outclassing traditional pastes significantly. Learn more at the link in the description below.
The thing about PCIe 4.0 is, do you have a 2080 Ti? Well, that doesn't use PCIe 4.0, it uses 3.0, so a B450 board for a 2080 Ti is actually a perfect fit. As wrong as that sounds, as far as the 2080 Ti is concerned, PCIe 3.0 is PCIe 3.0. It doesn't matter if it's coming from a $100 board or a $700 board, it's still PCIe 3.0. So that's something to keep in mind. The one thing currently that really takes advantage of PCIe 4.0 is like high-speed M.2 SSDs, which we've seen a bunch of them getting demonstrated. But the thing is, you'll have to make up your own mind if you need one of those. You'll have to make up your own mind about those. Personally, I still use SATA SSDs, so I don't have much to say in that area. I think they're a massive waste of money, but at the same time, I know there's like certain workloads where people really care about having very fast storage, and if you're one of those people, I assume you already know that you need PCIe 4.0 and you're excited to buy yourself a PCIe 4.0 motherboard. And if you're one of those people who doesn't do those things, then you probably don't need PCIe 4.0 and you don't know why you would need it in the first place, right? So I'd say PCIe 4.0 is one of those things. If you don't know why you need it, you probably don't. Yeah, and with the GPUs, so yeah, you might be like, okay, so the 2080 Ti doesn't support PCIe 4.0, but what about the 3080 Ti? That will support PCIe 4.0. Well, yes, but a 2080 Ti is really, really far away from maxing out of 3.0 X16. So I have a question for you. Do you think the 3080 Ti will be twice as fast as a 2080 Ti? Because I really doubt that. Considering the current rate of progress with GPUs, I really doubt that the next wave of GPUs will be suddenly twice as fast as what we currently have. And even then, unless you're buying the 3080 Ti, right? If you were buying like a mid-range 30,000 series, like 3000 series NVIDIA card, you would actually probably not be like, you would still not be anywhere near maxing out PCIe 4.0. So I think the need for PCIe 4.0 for GPUs is several years away, because currently GPUs aren't even currently GPUs are just about starting to reach the limit of like PCIe 3.0 X8. And the GPU reaching that limit is the 2080 Ti, not really anything else. So that's something to consider with the motherboards. And so we'll start off with sort of X470 boards for people who don't want to spend a bunch of money on PCIe 4.0 that they won't use, so that they can spend that money on things like better memory, better GPU with a better heatsink, or better CPU cooling system, right? Things that actually give you more performance rather than wasting money on a high-end board. Well, expensive board, because there's high-end X570 boards and low-end X570 boards, and the low-end ones are just still expensive. Anyway, so starting off with the X470 boards, the noteworthy motherboard here is the Taichi Ultimate, because this is the cheapest way to get 10 gig LAN on AM4, which is basically the only reason to get this board. You might be wondering, but Buildzoid, the Crosshair 7 Hero is a good board, and the Gaming 7 is also a good board. Yes, but there are $200 X570 motherboards that are also good boards, and those are $200. So they're slightly cheaper and good. So I don't know why you'd get a $270 X470 board when you can have a $200 X570 board that does the same thing, right? So that's something to consider. Though at the same time, there might be some feature that you really like about the Crosshair 7 Hero or the Gaming 7 from Gigabyte, and if you know what that is and you can't find it on an X570 board, just get this instead. I mean, there's no issue with that. Who am I to tell you what you need? But personally, I think there's nothing super impressive about any of the sort of $200+ X470 boards, because $200 X570 boards are really, I really like them. They're really, really good in my opinion. In fact, I think in some ways the $200 X570 motherboards are a bit too good, because a lot of the boards above that price point also don't make any sense as a result. But anyway, so Taichi Ultimate, really great option for the 10 gig LAN that it offers. But one concern with this board is that it does not have BIOS flashback. So you're going to have to get the retailer to actually update the BIOS of this motherboard for you, because otherwise it won't post with a 3rd gen CPU. So that's something to consider. That's an issue you'll run into. Anyway, moving on from the Taichi Ultimate, we have the Gaming Pro Carbon, which this board barely scrapes by, out of the 200. Like, as soon as you're $200, just buy an X570, in my opinion, because you can get some really great $200 X570 boards. But this board barely manages to avoid that. Yeah, at this price point, like, it makes sense. If you see it even cheaper, then it makes more sense. It has a good feature set. The VRM is good enough to run a 3900X even fully overclocked. You have good VRM heatsinks. It's a solid board. It's actually I use this motherboard for memory testing a ton, because I just really like the combination of at the price point, the VRM, the features. It's a really solid option in every way. And for that reason alone, I think, you should consider it. So yeah, there's the IO section. That's a clear CMOS button that you get right there. And that's also one of the things I really like about the board is clear CMOS on the rear IO is super handy if you're doing a lot of overclocking. Which actually most X570 boards don't have that, but they have so much I guess I feel like if you're paying the same for an older board that has, just because it has some extra buttons, I'd argue doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Because you can make the same argument for these boards, except that $180 X570 boards kind of they get pretty bad pretty fast, because the cheapest boards are $150. So at around the $180 mark, X570 boards are already really, really not great. Anyway, next board on X470 worth considering. This one only if you're getting an 8-core or a 6-core. If you're getting a 12-core, I would avoid this unless you intend to run it stock, because if you're overclocking, this VRM heatsink right here is atrocious and won't stop the VRM from overheating. Because yeah, these heatsinks have 0 surface area, and as a result, this VRM runs stupid hot if you put it if you use a 12-core. So for an 8-core or a 6-core, this motherboard's a really good fit. You have a really good set of good IO, good set of features, a really solid option. Also no BIOS flashback, so you're going to need your retailer to update it for you. Same as the Gaming Pro Carbon and the Taichi Ultimate. So that's kind of the only issue with these boards is that there's no BIOS flashback functionality on them. But other than that, they're definitely solid choices, and you save a bunch of money compared to the X570 boards. Now, moving on from sort of these X470 options, let's go into B450 boards. And for B450, I mean, if you like the feature set of the Gaming Pro Carbon, but you want to spend less money and you don't need the feature, X470 compared to B450, the only thing it really does is it offers SLI support. So if you don't plan to use SLI, you can get a Gaming Pro Carbon from MSI on B450 for $160, which is about $20 cheaper than the X470 Gaming Pro Carbon. But this thing also has Wi-Fi, which the Gaming Pro Carbon doesn't. I don't think it had. Still has Intel LAN. It also has BIOS flashback, so you can actually update the BIOS of this motherboard without having a CPU installed, which is great if you're buying it for a 3rd gen CPU. So that's really, really awesome. And overall, it literally has the same feature set as the Gaming Pro Carbon. The VRM is a bit of a downgrade, but it still has this really large VRM heatsink, so if you throw enough airflow at it, it'll still handle a 3900X. It's just that it will need airflow. And the board does have working VRM temperature sensors, so you can check if your cooling, if your VRM cooling is adequate, you can check it yourself, right? And always just rearrange, ultimately you can just throw a fan at it, that'll fix everything. So that's your expensive option for B450. Unfortunately, B450 is still in that situation where it's just all the best boards are MSI boards. I'm sorry. It's if you don't like MSI, Don't go to me for motherboard recommendations. My personal statement on my preferred motherboard vendor is that I hate all board vendors equally because they make crap boards. They did make crap boards, or they will make crap boards, and therefore none of them, there's no one brand that consistently makes the same level of quality. It always goes up and down for any platform, any price point. There's a different winner most of the time. Right? It's very, very rarely that you end up in a situation like MSI where basically all of the B450 MSI boards are just better than everybody else's. So good job, MSI. But once we get to the X570 boards, you'll see what I mean by you know, very rare that it's one brand just dominating the entire platform. So next we have the MSI B450 Tomahawk, and like it's a game, like you keep the upgraded VRM heatsink from the Gaming Pro Carbon, but it cuts down well, it's not as upgraded, it's not as large, but it is still a very effective heatsink. You do get BIOS flashback functionality and good overclocking support. Like, basically, you save some money. The main thing you lose is like Intel LAN, and there's no Wi-Fi on this. But, you know, if you don't care about those kinds of things, then this thing is $115, which is significantly cheaper than even the cheapest of the X570 boards. So definitely a solid option right there. And then if you want to save even more money, you can go as low as like the Gaming Plus down here. And unfortunately, MSI had like a bunch of MSI had Mortar MATX boards, which were based on the Tomahawk, like had the same VRM and VRM cooling as the Tomahawk, and for some reason those don't seem to be available anymore, which is really unfortunate, because I really like those boards. I think those were some of the best MATX boards produced on the entire AM4 platform up until. Actually, even with X570, we haven't really seen any good MATX boards. It's basically an abandoned form factor at this point. But yeah, if you want to go cheaper, there is the Gaming Plus. This still has BIOS flashback. The VRM has gotten another set of downgrades. So at this point, you know, this board only for like the 8-core and the 6-core CPUs, I would not overclock a 3900X on this, unless you want to be dealing with like a Delta fan sitting on top of the VRM, which, in other words, very loud. So yeah, but for the lower core count CPUs, this is actually a really solid option. And if you want MATX, then they do actually make an MATX version of that board in the form of this board. And that is also a pretty solid, it's a solid option for the same reason, right? It's just a smaller version of the other board. Unfortunately, this one's out of stock, so this one might be canceled soon as well, which kind of sucks. The only downside to this one is you do get only 2 DIMM slots, but you can get 32 gig DIMMs these days. So yeah, I don't really see that as an issue. And if anything, the fact that this only has 2 DIMM slots will make your memory overclocking better. So that's kind of neat. For ITX options on B450, there's one true answer, and that answer is this right here, because this has a really solid VRM. However, the cooling situation is less than ideal just because it's an ITX board, and they're always less than ideal in terms of cooling situation. The issue is these boards are just not very big, so you can't have a really big VRM heatsink, and there's a hard limit on how efficient your VRM can be. So at some point, you're going to run into the issue of you need a bigger heatsink, and you just can't get one. Now we can move on to X570. And in X570 land, we will start with the high end and then we'll work our way down. So first up, this board. I want to complain. I really want to complain. So this right here, this board, don't buy this board. Whatever you do, do not buy this motherboard, because this motherboard is a Crosshair 8 Hero with a water block and 5 gig LAN. That is the only 2 differences between this, the Formula, and the Hero. Oh, and it has, you know, like, well, aesthetics are like, look, if you want to pay $350 for an aesthetic IO, like for aesthetics, then I guess go for it. But the general issue is that, yeah, this right here has the same VRM, same IO section, same everything, except that this has 2.5 gig Realtek LAN as well as 1 gig Intel, while this has 5 gig Aquantia and 1 gig Intel. Oh, and this has this useless water block. And that water block is useless because it's sitting on a VRM that barely needs a heatsink in the first place. And, you know, Asus, instead of trying, like, here's the funny thing. That water block could have actually been a good feature to have on this motherboard if they had, like, heat pipes from the chipset heatsink going into the water block, so that when you water cool the VRM, it also cools down the chipset to the point that the fan doesn't need to ever turn on again. Instead, here's your useless water block on the VRM that doesn't need a heatsink and a 5 gig LAN for twice the price, right? Like, seriously, they're literally charging you twice as much money for a water block and a LAN upgrade. In the ultra high end, I think, you know, Gigabyte X570 Aorus Extreme kind of takes the win. And honestly, this is a board that, like, I don't think you need. But it is fully passive. There's no chipset fan because Gigabyte realized that with their ridiculously efficient VRM, we can use the VRM's heatsink as a chipset heatsink. So they have this heat pipe right here, and that basically means that they get away with running the chipset passive. So yeah, no fan. Awesome. And yes, the VRM is ridiculous overkill and complete, like the heat sinks on the VRM are great. Board is absolutely ridiculous. You also get 10 gig LAN, which is, again, like the formula is 5 gig, this is 10 gig, so more is better, right? Like, it's really that simple, especially since they cost the same amount of money. You get power and reset, you get dual BIOS, you get, you get the BIOS switches on this board as well, right down here. You get voltage read points. You basically get everything, like everything I ever wanted from a motherboard, you could get on this motherboard. Except that I never wanted a motherboard for $700. I'm sorry, Gigabyte, but even as a fan of, insane motherboards, $700 is insane, and not in a good way. But unfortunately, that seems to be the default ultra high-end price for X570, because the Godlike's also $700, and yeah, but the Godlike the Godlike is just this weird mishmash of features that it's not worth getting into as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, for X570, don't buy the formula. For the ultra high, definitely don't buy the formula. The Extreme looks, in my opinion, as the clear winner of the ultra high end for X570, but even that is just like, I really hard time justifying that board. Anyway, what else do we have? Well, there's the X570 Pro WS. This board is interesting because instead of 8884 PCIe configurations, it supports 8888. One concern I have with that is that the chipset only has a 4x connection to the CPU, so that 8x connection on the chipset PCIe slot down on the bottom edge, that still goes through the same 4x connection to the CPU. So there's a pretty good chance that if you're actually using 8x worth of bandwidth and you're communicating to the CPU with 8x worth of bandwidth, it'll just bottleneck anyway, and it won't give you any advantage over just having an X4 PCIe slot. So I'm not 100% certain what problem that PCIe slot is supposed to solve, because like the connection to the CPU is still an X4. Like you can't cram more data through an X4 than X4, right? Like that's kind of the idea behind that. So yeah, but interesting board nonetheless. So that's why it gets a shout out. Then here we have the X570 Aorus Master, the X570 Phantom Gaming X. We all, of course, also have the Crosshair 8 Hero. Where is it? 8 Hero, non-Wi-Fi. We also get the Crosshair 8 Hero with Wi-Fi, and then the Meg Ace. And all of these boards are in that 350 to 360, 370, 80, yeah, 80 for Asus, of course. Have to be the most expensive. $380 price range. And the thing about all of these boards, as far as I'm concerned, they're all interchangeable. None of them is a clear winner in any way, shape, or form, so just pick your own poison, because ultimately I think it's going to come down to whichever board has like the best memory overclocking support, which depends on like BIOS and a whole bunch of things that I just can't judge right now. Like I'd actually have to test the board, and memory testing takes forever. So yeah, like I can't see any one board here for the $350 price tag. I can't see any one board that's a clear winner. And so just kind of pick whatever you like the aesthetics of, I guess, or whichever BIOS you prefer more, or that kind of thing. Cause yeah, all of these boards, like on paper, they're completely equivalent as far as I'm concerned. So that's kind of that. Then we get to the $300 price point with the X570-E, which this shouldn't exist, because this shouldn't, like the Dash F should get canceled, and the Dash E should get a lower price tag as far as I'm concerned. This thing, like, it's a bit too expensive. Then we have the Aorus Ultra and the Taichi and well, MSI doesn't really have a $300 board, do they? I don't think they do, because they basically, yeah, they have the Ace and they have the Gaming Pro Carbon, and the Gaming Pro Carbon is $250 and the Ace is $369. So MSI is not competing in the $300 arena, which is fine as far as I'm concerned, but the winner of the $300 arena as far as features are concerned is the Taichi. It just, because basically, whereas like basically the way to think about all of the other boards in the $300 price tag is look at the Master, look at the Phantom Gaming X, look at the Crosshair 8 Hero, and then start chopping off features, and you'll get the $300 boards. But the thing is, the Taichi has very little cut away. Like the only thing it loses is like the 2.5 gig LAN compared to the Phantom Gaming X. And as a result, it just ends up with a better feature set than every other board at this price point. So for $300, the Taichi is, in my opinion, a clear winner, assuming ASRock hasn't screwed up their BIOS or something, right? So that right there is the board to beat for $300. I think a lot of the other boards they just don't have the same feature set. They're like, post like this has everything that the Phantom Gaming X has, except it's like $300 cheaper except the LAN. Whereas something like this technically keeps the VRM heatsink off the master, but it loses the postcode, it loses the buttons, right, which are really cheap things that I think should have stayed. It maintains the M.2 slots, but it also gets a different VRM that's significantly worse, whereas the Phantom Gaming X and the Taichi, the same VRM on both. And it's a very solid VRM. In fact, it's not really that different from the VRM that you get on the Ultra. It's just that, well, this has more features other than that. So yeah, at that point, you should just go for the Taichi. So $250 price tag is a price tag that I don't even get why X570 motherboards exist in the $250 price category, because $200 X570 boards exist. So fun fact, the Dash E, the Dash F, and the Dash Pro over here, these all use the same VRM as the Tough Gaming right here. All of them have the same VRM, and this is $200, and it comes with Wi-Fi, which funnily enough, the Dash Pro doesn't have, which doesn't make any sense. So that's kind of that. So this is like, if you want Wi-Fi and a solid VRM, you get this. And if you want a solid VRM, don't need Wi-Fi, and you want BIOS flashback functionality, there's the Aorus Elite, which is a really solid option. And there's the Steel Legend from ASRock, but that kind of doesn't really, like, that doesn't have any clear advantage over the other two, as it has a weaker VRM than both, and it doesn't even have as many features as either of them. So this doesn't have Wi-Fi, whereas this does have Wi-Fi. It doesn't have BIOS flashback, whereas this does have BIOS flashback. So because of that, I think in the $200 price tag, oh, and this also has Intel LAN, whereas this is Realtek. So, if you don't care about the Wi-Fi, get the Elite. If you do care about the Wi-Fi, get the Tough. That's kind of the solution right there. Also, this is the one and only ITX motherboard currently listed on Newegg. There are other ITX boards coming out eventually. They're just not available yet. So, you'll have to wait for the rest to turn up if you're interested in ITX builds. So that's the $200 price point. Like, I think honestly, Gigabyte and Asus kind of screwed up. These two boards are too good. Like, because these are so good that, like, the $250 price point, I don't know. Like, okay, so this has a different, slightly, like, this has a different VRM that's, like, slightly better. But feature set wise, it's basically the same thing as the Elite. Right? They added like an extra M.2 cover, and they added some debug LEDs, but you can live without debug LEDs as far as I'm concerned. So it's just like, yeah, I'm not paying $70 more to get debug LEDs and Wi-Fi. That's silly, right? Especially because if I care about Wi-Fi, I can buy the $200 Asus board, and this does have debug LEDs. Right? So even actually, if you're not offended by the Realtek LAN, you can just go straight for this for $200. Like, this thing is an absolutely killer value, and it just makes it makes the Dash Pro irrelevant. It makes the Dash F irrelevant. It makes the Dash E irrelevant. So good job, Asus. You just did an Asus, I guess. And the same for Gigabyte, where it's just like the $200 board is. Like, I don't know why you'd get the 270 one when this one does almost everything I can think of. Like, if you have a basic set of features that you need from your motherboard, this one does them. This one already does it. You don't need to pay more than that. And then, if we keep sliding down, like, it is worth noting that at the $300 to $350 price tag, you get massive VRM upgrades from a lot of the boards and much better, like, heavy overclocking focus, right? But yeah, at $250, you get, like, because $250, like, it's that price tag where they're trying to mishmash the $200 boards with features from the $350 boards. And I feel like they just really mismatched the features. And the end result is that, yeah, just $200 and you get the two most cost-effective motherboards on the entire bloody platform. And then below $200, well, the boards get super stripped down, and as a result, I wouldn't really recommend any of them. The only one I would consider is the X570-P from Asus here, because, like, funnily enough, this VRM section right here is very, very similar to what you get on a Maximus 11 Hero. So that's kind of why I give this the win for the sort of cheap $170 X570 board, is because yeah, you get the VRM off the Maximus 11 Hero, and this is just better than a lot of the VRM, all of the other boards in terms of VRM at this price point. So yeah, and there's not really any, like, feature. Well, it doesn't have BIOS flashback, which I think both MSI and Gigabyte have on their entire lineup, but it's just like, if you want BIOS flashback, you could go for the Gaming X. And the Gaming X, I mean, very different approach to the VRM design. Like Asus is going for power stages and only 4 phases with 2 power stages per phase, which ultimately gives them a really good power handling capability. And you can compensate for low phase count with higher switching frequency, better output filtering, better input filtering. So ultimately, there's many ways to design a good VRM, and Asus just decided to go for one that unfortunately looks really bad in marketing. Because you say, oh yeah, it's a 4 phase, and it's just like, well, that sounds low, and it is low, but you can make that work, and you can make it work very well if you try. So anyway, whereas Gigabyte decided to go for a sort of more they're going for 10-phase vCore with a bunch of discrete MOSFETs, so much less sophisticated in execution, but still really powerful. And you do keep BIOS flashback, but the thing is, like, it's also Realtek LAN at this point, and it's just once the VRM, ultimately the VRM efficiency is comparable. The VRM power delivery quality, I don't know which one would have an advantage. You'd have to use an oscilloscope to check, and I doubt you'd actually notice a difference in overclocking anyway. So at that point, it's just like, yeah, you can go for that. You can go for that. And if you want BIOS flashback, I would go for this. Well, the one concern I have with this is that this has MOSFETs on the back of the board, and there's not a back of the board picture. But basically, those are a bit of a cooling hazard, which the X570-P doesn't need to deal with because it just uses power stages. Those are all on the front of the board. So yeah, X570 is just like, in the low end, you kind of have Gigabyte with the Elite. While in the cheap X570 boards, you have the Elite from Gigabyte, which absolutely kills it. The Tough Gaming, which in my opinion obliterates Asus's own motherboard lineup above $200. Good job, Asus, right there. You made a motherboard that's too good for once. You also have the Tough Gaming non-Wi-Fi, which is $190, which at that point, that's like, yeah, if you don't need the Wi-Fi, that's a really solid option as well. Like, the thing is, like, MSI's Gaming Plus is also $170. It's just the VRM on this is significantly worse than on the other two $170 boards. And it's not like it makes up for that with, well, anything, right? Because Realtek LAN, again, similar, like, actually, I don't pay that much attention to the audio section, but I don't know. If you care about that, you can check that yourself. But there's nothing immediately that stands out to me on this board. The I/O section is not that special. You do get BIOS flashback, but the Gigabyte board also gives you BIOS flashback. So, like, it seems like with X570, the board vendors have all actually tried to build really good boards. And as an end result, we have a bunch of good boards. Unfortunately, that also means you kind of have a lot of options, which are like, there's not really any wrong choices. Like, it's hard to find wrong choices, and at the same time, they've managed to make certain price categories just silly because there's boards that are really good at lower price points. Like, in fact, like the Aorus Pro Wi-Fi versus the Elite, like, if you compare the I/O sections, it's the same thing. Literally, like, I have no idea why Gigabyte thought this board is necessary. I guess it's like this is a thing that I guess in the industry where it's just like, oh yeah, we need to fill out every $50 price category, and so every $50 there's a new SKU, even if that SKU doesn't make any bloody sense to anybody, because it's just like, well, what does it introduce that actually benefits the end user? Nothing. Well, why does it exist then? Because we don't have a $250 board. So that's kind of the issue. But X570 looks really, really solid. If you're looking at sort of like, if you want a motherboard that basically has everything, you're looking at a $350 board. And if you hate chipset fans, well, yeah, I mean, you're kind of stuck with the extreme. Yeah, overall, honestly, I'm really glad that there's not really any one X570 board where I'm just like, well, I think the Pro 4 series from ASRock looks concerningly similar to the X470 Master SLI in terms of in the VRM department. And that's concerning because that VRM sucked. So, yeah, those are the only boards where I'm like, I would really avoid those. But everything else looks really, really solid from everyone, basically. So, yeah, I guess good job, Mobo makers, for making an entire platform of motherboards that, at least on paper, all look really good. I guess it's just now we just need to find out who has like the best memory overclocking support due to BIOS tuning and memory layout and that kind of thing. Which, like, you can't judge that from pictures. Like, you actually need that to be reviewed and tested. And at the same time, I'd say up to 37, 33 megahertz, any board should be fine. It's really past like 42, like past 4,000 megahertz is where you start noticing major differences between motherboards and memory overclocking. So yeah, anyway, that's it for the video. Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. And if you'd like to support Gamers Nexus, we got store.gamersnexus.net. If you'd like to pick up merch like mod mats, toolkits, that shirts, that kind of thing. And if you'd like to support us directly, we do have a Patreon page there you can which you can use to just support us monthly without having to buy anything. And if you and I have a channel called Actually Hardcore Overclocking where I do more overclocking related stuff. If you'd like to check that out, that would be awesome. There's links to all of that down in the description below and also in the comment section. And yeah, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching and goodbye.